Namaste and welcome. The Dalliance with Destiny. This book, written by a South African Indian, takes us on a journey of discoveries and adventures within Bharat. Our guest speaker, a lover of Bharat, the author of this book, is here with us to have a deep and meaningful conversation on the book and of our beloved motherland. Aman Singh Maharaj ji has a PhD in development studies. He has a multitude of diverse professions such as engineering, economist, and is now an entrepreneur. Quite enamored by the concept of magical realism, he decided to enter the literary realm. Welcome and namaste, sir. I hope you're well.
Namaste, Payal. Namaste, viewers. All my best to you. My pranams this Friday.
Well, first of all, congratulations on your first novel. I see it has received incredible reviews, so very well done on that. So let's just get back straight into maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and your life in South Africa as an Indian. I'm intrigued. I know the Gandhiji story, so I'm sure there's many in the audience who would be too.
Sure. The Gandhiji story is a once-off unique situation. Most Indians that who live in South Africa are not of the same stock in terms of how we came here. I would say a good 70% of the Indians in South Africa came as well. Now they are descendants of original indentured laborers. When slavery was stopped in around the world by the British and the rest of the European countries, what the British did was ushered in slavery instead as the next best thing. But it was effectively slavery, but just in a different form. So if you look at the Indians in South Africa, Suriname, British Guyana, Jamaica, Trinidad, and Fiji, and Mauritius. We were the Indians who were brought from around 1834, which was the first batch sent to Mauritius, right up to 1911. We are the descendants of those particular people who came from what was then called it's now called UP, but it was then called the United Provinces of Agra and Oudh and West Bengal, or the Bengal Presidency at that time. And the rest came from the south area, which then called the Madras Presidency, which is now Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. So we are fourth, fifth, sixth, some going on to seven generations coming from those intentional laborers who came here.
So, how is life as an Indian in South Africa? What's your take? Is there many of you in the community? Is there still are you still strong to your roots?
Well, I would say, about 1.5 million Indians, comprising mainly of those who came from MP, UP, and Bihar, which is called the Hindi speaking belt. We call them erroneously Hindi speaking people. I don't think anyone else uses that term globally. Then there's the Gujaratis, and then we have the Tamils and the Telugus. Uh, Within this grouping, we've got Muslims, Hindus, and Christians. Life it depends on, what do you measure success by. If you're looking at it in terms of, you're a wealthy man, you're above upper middle class or above, you're living a very comfortable life, because we still have some colonialist hangovers. Labor is cheap, and I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's actually a bad thing, because it creates this colonialist backdrop for those of us who have the access to the finances to live a much more comfortable life than what you'd actually see in the West. But then a vast number of Indians are actually living below the poverty line or below the bread line, which is very sad. And it's sad that any race or anyone should be living below the poverty line. So we got a dichotomy. We've got the wealthy and we've got the poor. And we've got, I think, the highest Gini coefficient in the world, meaning the biggest disparity between poor and rich. And I think it is creating some social issues. That actually, the social issues have always been there, but it's becoming worse. In terms of our linkages to Bharat, right up to 1994, India had pressed sanctions against South Africa with regards to because of apartheid, and I guess we as Indians suffered because of that because we didn't have direct access to goods and products from India. It all came via different countries, um, and in as much as we regard ourselves as Indians, depending on the generation and depending on the kind of household you grew up in, many just call themselves South Africans. I am not a benchmark. I see myself as an Indian first, which is probably wrong. I should be seeing myself as a South African first, but my patriotism has definitely diminished because of the way the country has been run by the ruling government over the last 30 years. And arguably, in my point, it's been run very poorly. And that sort of extracted the patriotism towards out of me. And the logical home that I started to see, obviously, is India. And I've always resonated with India. I've always seen it as a motherland. I've been there about 18 to 20 times and I'll continuously go to India. I mean, it pulls me not just from a culinary perspective or a religious perspective or a cultural perspective. It's also the philosophy, the whole vibe of India, the way it's excelling country currently. It's just on a different. If you go to India, every year you'll see the increase in infrastructure or the improvement in infrastructure. So it's just growing in leaps and bounds in every possible way, and that makes me feel very proud. Hope that answers your question, Payal. I probably
Yes,
went
it
over.
does. It does. It does indeed. And I can totally resonate with you. You know, I'm a British born Indian, and I have a special love for Bharat. And I lived out there for 10 years. I've just returned back to Britain, and my heart is still in Bharat, although I'm here back physically. Well, let's now tap into the actual novel, A Dalliance with Destiny. You've written this, it's your first novel. And what inspired you? Was it real life events? Because I know the slight plot of the story resemblances, a person going from South Africa to Bharat and whatever else. So give us your take.
When one writes literature as compared to pulp fiction, which I egotistically refer to my writing as literature, there's always a bit of oneself that goes into it. But I don't think my life is extraordinary enough to write about it or to do an autobiography. So what you do is you may take an event or a series of events that you may have witnessed, and then you hype it up and put it on steroids so it becomes more palatable to the reader. So, are there elements of yourself in the characters? Yes, there are would be elements, but like I said, you have to hype them up to the point that they become almost unrecognizable. For instance, the protagonist, he's not, he's very misogynistic. He's a very negative character, if I may put it. And hopefully, through the story, he redeems himself. I'd like to think I'm not a misogynist, but I mean, that depends on what other people think. Um, but yes, the book itself is set, I think, 20% in India and about 80%, I'm sorry, 20% in South Africa and 80% in India. If anyone hasn't seen the book, here's a picture of the book or the cover. And it represents, I mean, if you're a Hindu, you understand immediately as the lady's hair is becoming the river, it represents Mother Ganga. And there's a character in front of it who's sort of almost bowing or showing reverence towards her, which represents the main character. So, whilst it's a book that has a lot of history in it, it's a piece of fiction, and it's also has a lot of philosophy. But at the same time, it's also quite raunchy. I don't think anyone under 18 should be actually be reading this book. And then it has a lot to do with the cultural differences between the two countries, and it's also about a coming of age story where a young man is trying to find out, what is his role in life? Where does he belong? He's completely dislocated. He's born here. His parents are born here. His grandparents are born here. and but he still does not feel that he's a part of this country. And the cliche is, if you don't feel like you belong, you run away to India and you look for salvation, which is what he does. But it's done in a very unusual way. And he goes to India looking for love, sex, a guru. He's looking for guidance on what he should do with his life, because he's completely bewildered and lost, but yet an intelligent man. So that's the essence of the story. He's going from city to city. He's traveling up the Ganges to his ancestral villages and closing the loop of what his ancestors had done between 100 and 120 years ago. So that's the essence of it. Yeah.
Interesting. And I know so many people who have sort of done that, like gone to India and gone on that kind of journey. But of course, this book seems like a very glorified version of what actually happens to people in reality when they actually go to India. So, it sounds like an adventure definitely worth reading, with your imagination involved there too. So, do you want to go further into the plot or story of the actual book? Any of your favorite parts, or what you'd like to, how to encourage some of the audience members to maybe go and pick it up?
Sure. So the kind of book which I only learned after it was written, that it's described, or the genre that it falls under, besides being contemporary fiction, is something called Bildungsroman, which I think is a German term meaning coming of age, where you see an evolution of the character and a maturing of the character as he gets to learn through life. And another example of a Bildungsroman typically would be Catcher in the Rye, which is a famous book, or To Kill a Mockingbird, which is another very famous book. In terms of how I was first influenced, I think, maybe 30 years ago, I read Autobiography of a Yogi, where Paramahansa Yogananda was on a similar journey, and he was trying to find himself. He went from place to place, trying to find a guru, or trying to find salvation, or trying to find an answer to life. And this book is similar in that sense, that there's a series of experiences that the character goes through, but it's done in a modern way, and it's done in a way that's probably a bit raunchy as well. It's real life. Life, Durban, which is a city that I come from, is a very, very conservative town compared, for example, to global cities like London and so forth. So the kind of genre and the kind of plots and the kind of themes that I've used, I think it's the first time being done by an Indian South African or South African Indian writer. So it did raise a few eyebrows, but I always say, there's just over 7 billion people in the world. How many of us were born through Immaculate Conception? Something had to have happened for us to be born. And that generally, shuts people up when they want to critique, based on the fact that it's containing 2 to 18 sort of themes. And I didn't do it deliberately to titillate. I did it because it fitted the storyline. One of my sort of favorite aspects about it is when the character is in Calcutta. There's 3 chapters dedicated to Calcutta, and he has a live-in relationship with an Anglo-Indian girl, and it becomes purely a sexual one. But she's also an extremely intelligent girl, and she challenges him intellectually. But at the same time, it's not what he wants in terms of a romance. That's not what he's looking for. So he says she satisfies 1 or 2 aspects of him, but not his heart. But it's very real because it brings out what men are, how visual men are, especially when it comes to love. We like to think we are these hugely emotional beings when, men can be very superficial and fall in love with the face or fall in love with the body. That's how we've, unfortunately, if not have we've been designed, it's the way we do enact our lives. And I'm not agreeing with it, but I'm saying it is what it is, and I'm just wrote what is a reflection of reality.
Interesting. And when I read books written by male authors, and you get that kind of perspective, it's always an eye opener to us females, I must admit. Um, So yeah, it's to I just feel you're being a book which is honest to some level always does engage the audience. So I can see why it has received such great reviews. Uh, on the next, a bit more about yourself now in respect to why I know you said you enjoyed writing the parts that were based in Bharat the most. Why is that? What is it about you and your love for Bharat that made which was so enticing for you to write these parts?
So, like I said, I've been to India maybe 18 to 20 times. I just came back less than 3 weeks ago. I'm going back again next week. I spent probably 7 weeks in India in the last 2 months. And here I'm going, less than 3 weeks later. You either love India or you hate it. There's no in between. Okay, I went there, it was okay. You either want to put up, well, the filth has actually diminished a hell of a lot. I mean, I first went in 1981 when I was a 7-year-old kid. And compared then to what it is now, it's so vastly improved. You don't have these swarms of beggars that come to you begging for money as you used to back in the early 80s. Now that there is a patriotic movement governing India, in as much as they may get their criticisms, I think the criticism is unwarranted because there's been such major improvements in terms of tax collections, in terms of infrastructure development. India is on the move. It's regarded as a global superpower, which never happened under the previous regime. Why am I so patriotic towards India? Well, it's the only ancient civilization that survives in the modern world. If you look at it, look at the Egyptians, they never survived. Mayans never survived. Even ancient China never survived. But India has retained 80% of the people as Hindus, despite being conquered probably by 8 different or 7 different countries. Yet they still remain. And this happened over a period of what, 700 years? So there must be something very primordial, very ancient, very, what is the word? Sort of embracing and sort of almost revelatory that I look at India with, almost in awe. And remember, right up to 1994 or 1992, I think Indians were not allowed, it was on their passport. I'm talking about Indians from India, valid for any country except the Republic of South Africa. It was stamped there because there was an embargo because of apartheid. And, we were so starved of Indian people that when they started coming here, we almost hero worshipped them. Certainly I did. And my love for India is not something that we should take in as benchmark. I mean, I support the Indian cricket team. I, you know, I probably know all the words to the Indian national anthem as compared to the national anthem of my own country. And I'm categorically saying it's wrong, but it is what it is. My heart is based in India simply because it has that pull for me. And no matter how much I try and to analyze that intellectually or to change that, I just can't. The heart wants what it wants, and that's how it is. So to me, I breathe India. My aim is to eventually, hopefully, die in India, and I because I feel most at home in India. So it is what it is. That's the choice I've made.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, on the same idea of why do people go to India, to Bharat for they say a lot of people go to find themselves, and your book is sort of on this lines as well. They go to find themselves, they go to heal, feel alive. What is it? What is it? Can you what is it in your feelings that I know you said for you it's a matter of the heart, but for those who may not even know India so well, they don't have that same love, but they still seem to tend to go. What do you think it has that other countries may lack?
It's very strange because whilst India has definitely progressed, I mean, generally when I land in India, you land in Bombay. They would, in the early days, in the 80s and maybe up to the 90s, as soon as you landed in India, that woof of India, the open sewer systems of Bombay hit you. That stench.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, the human psyche is a very strange thing. You begin to adapt to that stench, and you begin, to say you begin to like it as a strange thing. But for me personally, I don't like going to a country that is so super clean, that is sanitized. I want a little bit of filth
Sterile, yeah.
in it. Now, not many people resonate with that. So a lot of people go to India for the glamour. A lot of people go there just to buy clothes. I buy all my Eastern clothes in India, and I also buy a lot of all my Western clothes in India, especially in Bombay. People go to India, generally you get people from the West. I think it was Swami Prabhupada, which I mentioned in my book. He used to call the white guys that came from Europe and America, he used to call them his dancing white elephants. So, everywhere you go, Varanasi, you'll see these white tourists wearing cheesecloth, and they've got these bindis, and even the men looking for salvation. Whether they're finding it or not, I don't know. I'm a bit iffy about it. But you know what? I think wherever you start on the path, it's going to take you there. So, there are other people who are deluded. They want to go there to become actors and actresses, even though they can't speak the language. So, there are many reasons. Some people go for the food. I mean, I've never eaten as tasty as the food as what I do when I go to Bombay, especially all the Indo-Asian food and the fusion food. It's a different. I mean, it's not just cooking. It's an absolute science. So there are so many reasons. There's the philosophy. I can sit in a taxi and have an absolute philosophical discussion with the taxi driver, which I would never have here.
Mhm.
So it's all
That's
these
true.
things and more. And ultimately, for me, it's the heart. For other people, it could be the glamour. Or it could be, what, I want to do charity work in India. For other people, I want to find myself. Whatever it is, India seems to be what we call the axis mundi of the world, which is the center of gravity of the world.
Yeah. Again, completely resonate with that. Yeah, I agree. So there's so many reasons why, and I think there's just so many opportunities in so many ways as well. Whether it is delving into yourself, external or internal, both are available there in India, and I think that's the beauty of it. On the flip, though, why do you think there's many Indians there living out there in Bharat who want to leave and move maybe to the West? What's your feelings on that?
Yeah, I've actually brought it up in my book, and I subtly, or maybe not subtly, maybe overtly, I do criticize uh, this preconception that life in the West is infinitely better. If you look at I've experienced this. I've seen the kind of respect I used to get in the early days in India, especially in high society. The moment I said I was from Africa, there was almost a sneer. They probably thought these guys are living in huts, or these guys are, there's lions running around. But the moment you speak of the West, especially the UK and America, the eyes light up. And to me, it's ridiculous because the middle class in India, in the cities, they can afford not just one or two servants, they can afford a number of servants. You move to the UK or the USA, you cleaning your own toilet. And for girls in India who are used to having all these different servants to make their roti, to cook for them, who are cleaning, their rooms, making their beds, or they have drivers, hell do you adapt to life in the West? So I don't know why. I mean, surely in this internet age, they should know what life in America is, what life in the USA and UK is. You got to basically, it's an egalitarian society. So you, with the same amount of money, you buy less, and you have access to less or to labor. But for some strange reason, they still, hero worship the West, and I find it very annoying, extremely annoying. In fact, I always say this, and Payal, you might be get upset by me saying this. If you look at the house I'm being interviewed in right now, it's almost a Haveli. If I was earning the same amount and living in the UK, I'll be living in those small brownstone uh, houses, which are semi-attached, touching the next house with a small garden in the back,
Exactly.
which is so claustrophobic. I would not be able to handle it. So, you know,
I'm living
it's
in one of
beyond.
those, so I understand.
That's why I'm saying and I don't mean it in a
No,
negative way, or maybe it is a negative way, but it's comparative.
it's a
You
great
know,
observation. It's a great observation, and
it
I,
is.
yeah.
They,
So,
if you look at the matrimonials, they actually have a section that says NRIs. The fact that there is a matrimonial section for green card for the USA, it's bizarre. And where is love? Where is love in the whole thing? You want to marry someone based on geographical reasons
I know
away from your family? How ridiculous is that? But it
it is.
is. It is. It happens.
Yeah, for some people, it's a package, right? It's not just about love, and that it's the life that their future life that they'll be offered. But who's to say? Everyone, each to their own on that in some ways. But I totally again agree with you that like I said, I was living out in India for 10 years, and I I really do envy people who are born, brought up there, and have their support structure, their family, everything set up. That was the part I found difficult, because all my family and friends were in Britain. But if I had that, if I was blessed to be born there, I would not have moved, for sure. Yeah. So, is there anything else you'd like to share? Current projects you're doing? No, is there another book in the pipeline? Anything else you'd like to give us some insights into?
The plan was to be a one-hit wonder. I wrote 1,200 pages in 2006 in 3 months, and it took me 16 years to edit it down to 400 pages. And I thought that's it. And I was deliberately slow about it because I was also nervous about releasing this novel because, like I said, it's highly misogynistic. And somewhere in the 16 years, the whole Me Too movement started. And I got a bit nervous. What if the feminists or the ultra feminists out there start attacking me? Because you would have noticed during this period, a lot of male orientated writers like Philip Roth and gang, even I think Hanif Qureshi, who's a UK based author, he stopped writing books like that. And I got nervous. And then I finally decided to release it when there was this case between Amber Heard and her husband. His name is not coming to mind, from Pirates of the Caribbean. And it was such a disgusting case in terms of how he was abused as a man that I think it killed a bit of the Me Too movement. Now, I'm not saying the Me Too movement was not required. It was, because there definitely are predators out there. But it had the side effect of also killing male orientated literature, which was something that was not good for me. But after that, and then look, I think Andrew Tate has a lot of misogynistic sort of traits, but there are certain things that he says does make sense. Not all, but certain things. So I think that opened up the door for men to kind of reclaim a portion of the manhood in a good way, not in a way that they were going to thwart the success or the growth of their female compatriots.
The readers so far who have given you feedback, like, is it mainly females, males? What is the overall kind of feeling?
I think it's been right down the middle. I had probably one of the biggest book launches in South Africa, maybe even in Africa. I had about 400 people at my first book launch in Durban. Obviously, a lot of them were friends and family who came to support me. But it happened just after COVID, sort of the COVID restrictions ended. A lot of them bought the book and didn't read. South Africa does not have a reading audience. The biggest cohort of people who read books in South Africa are white, middle-aged English women who read books in South Africa. The ones who love ABBA and are still hooked on ABBA, those kind of women. I have not been able to cross over into that sector as yet. I have mainly had Indians reading it. Well, India, obviously, it's Indians, especially the Bengalis. They are voracious readers. South Africa, I think, Netflix and all the social media has killed reading to a certain extent. I'm very tactile. If I'm reading a book, I've got to feel the book. I've got to smell the paper. I've got to hear the rustle of the pages. I can't read a Kindle, all due respect to Amazon and all other kinds of ebooks. But I'm also trying to penetrate England. I've had a lot of readers in England, white people who've loved the book, but England has always had a love affair with India. Because of the British Raj. So I've only had one negative review. It came from a feminist, unfortunately, who was quite aghast at some of the themes. But if you are going to place limitations on me or ask me to not just edit but to tone down my writing, then you are placing restrictions that I just don't want. And coming from South Africa, where there was always been, censorship. It's a bitter pill to swallow, because a lot of the traditional commercial publishers in South Africa wanted me to edit the book down terribly, especially the controversial kind of stuff, especially where I may have mentioned things that were not necessarily anti-white, but spoke the truth. And I said, no, I'm not going to do this. Like, for example, I'll give you an idea. Not many in South Africa. We get two groups of whites. We get the English descent, and then we get the Afrikaners. It's a proven fact that the Afrikaners, although they look white, they have about 5 or 6% African blood running through their veins, because in 1652, when the first settlers came from the Netherlands, there was only men coming for the first 50 years. So they started to procreate with the local San tribes. And that's how we had the coloreds coming about in the country, who number a hell of a lot. But that first 50 years after that, that generation that was born started to marry white women who started to come 50 years later from Holland. And, they kind of whitened over the generations, but there's still that 6% black blood. And I mentioned it in my book, and, the local commercial publishers wanted me to take it out. And I said, why? It's fact. It was proven. People did genetic tests and it was proven. Somebody even did a PhD thesis on it, but they're not willing to accept such a, statement being made. And I don't know why they would see it as being an insult. You have a certain blood, a certain racial profile in your genetics, so what? That is your birth. So that is the kind of stuff that I was dealing with.
Wow, interesting. Really interesting. I think we can have a long conversation on South Africa. I'm really intrigued. But we'll leave it at that. And it was a total honor and a pleasure to speak to you today, Amanji. And I thank the audience for watching. And of course, do go buy your copy of A Dalliance with a Destiny. It seems like it's a must read. I'm going to do the same. And please do like, share, and subscribe. Namaste to you all.
Namaste, everyone. Namaste, Payal. Thank you for the time and effort that you've put into doing this interview today. I appreciate it.
Most welcome.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. धन्यवाद, नमस्कार.